Have you ever wondered about the people who stand silently in the shadows of great stories? Job's wife is one such figure, a character often overlooked, yet her brief words in the Bible carry a profound message. Today, we'll explore the untold story of Job's wife, uncovering the depth of her humanity and the lessons her journey holds for us. You'll discover how her struggles, often misunderstood, resonate with our own challenges and reveal timeless truths about faith, resilience, and grace. The Bible is filled with stories of extraordinary individuals, and even those mentioned sparingly can teach us life-changing lessons. Through her pain, her controversial words, and her journey to restoration, Job's wife reminds us that even in our weakest moments, there is strength to be found and hope to hold on to. Job's wife is often mentioned briefly in discussions about his story, yet her role carries profound implications for understanding the human experience of suffering. While Job's trials are well documented, the Bible provides only a single verse that directly quotes his wife, leaving much of her character and story open to interpretation. But even in this brief mention, her presence invites deeper exploration. Imagine standing beside someone you love as they lose everything, wealth, children, and health. This was the reality for Job's wife. Her world collapsed alongside Job's, yet her voice remains a whisper in a narrative dominated by Job's unwavering faith. Despite her limited mentions, her experience reflects a shared humanity, one filled with grief, frustration, and moments of weakness. Her famous statement, "Curse God and die," has been a focal point of criticism, often painting her as a faithless partner. However, understanding her role requires empathy. What if her words were not born of defiance, but of deep sorrow and despair? Could they represent the cry of someone overwhelmed by grief rather than a lack of faith? In the ancient Near Eastern culture, women's voices were often overshadowed, their roles relegated to the background. Yet Job's wife emerges as a symbol of humanity's struggle to reconcile faith and suffering. She challenges us to see her not as an antagonist in Job's story, but as a person navigating unimaginable pain. Her presence in the story is also a reminder of resilience. Though her reaction might seem harsh, it speaks to the depth of her suffering. Job's wife teaches us that faith is not always unshakable. It's often forged in the fires of doubt and fear. This rediscovery of her role invites us to step back and see Job's wife not as a cautionary tale, but as a complex figure, someone who mirrors the emotions we may feel in our darkest moments. What if her story is less about failure and more about grace? As we delve deeper into her journey, let's consider how her experience relates to our own lives. How do we respond to moments of overwhelming grief? And how can her story inspire us to view others with empathy, even in their most vulnerable moments? Grief is a powerful force, capable of shaping hearts and relationships in ways we cannot fully understand. In Job's story, we often focus on his suffering, his loss of wealth, health, and children. But what about Job's wife? Her pain is often overlooked, yet she too faced the unbearable grief of losing her children and the life she once knew. Imagine a mother burying her children, one by one, without the comfort of understanding why. The Bible does not elaborate on her emotions, but it is not difficult to picture the depth of her anguish. Grief, like hers, does not have a script. It is messy, unpredictable, and deeply personal. Her story reminds us that loss is not isolated. In moments of tragedy, entire families are affected. Job and his wife experienced the same calamities, but their responses differed, much like how people today cope with grief in their unique ways. While Job sought refuge in his faith, his wife's reaction seems more visceral, raw, and immediate, a testament to the human experience of pain. How often do we, like Job's wife, feel forgotten in our suffering? Perhaps you've faced moments when your grief felt invisible, overshadowed by the needs or stories of others. Her story offers a connection to those feelings, a shared vulnerability that speaks to anyone who has ever felt alone in their sorrow. The Bible's silence on her inner thoughts invites us to fill the gaps with empathy. She wasn't just a witness to Job's suffering, she lived it. And in living it, she became a reflection of the struggles many of us face when the weight of loss becomes too much to bear. Yet, even in her pain, there is an unspoken resilience. Job's wife endured the same tragedies and continued living through the silence of her story. Her presence in Job's narrative, though fleeting, reveals that survival itself can be a powerful testimony. As we reflect on her grief, we are reminded of our own. How do we honor the unspoken pain of those around us? And how can we find hope in the midst of sorrow, just as Job's wife may have, even in ways we cannot see? Job's wife is often remembered for one sentence: "Curse God and die." These words, spoken at the peak of her despair, have sparked centuries of debate and judgment. Was she faithless or simply human? To understand her, we must step into her pain and examine the context of her words. Grief can make us say things we don't mean, words spoken in the heat of overwhelming emotion. Imagine the crushing weight Job's wife must have carried. Her children were gone, her husband was suffering, and her once secure life had been shattered. In a moment like that, it's easy to understand why her words may have been fueled by sorrow, not defiance. Her statement might reflect a deeply human response to pain. How many of us, in moments of despair, have thought or said things we later regretted? It's in these moments that we see Job's wife not as a villain, but as a mirror of our own struggles with faith and doubt. Culturally, her words might have also been misinterpreted. Some scholars suggest her phrase could mean something closer to "bless God and let go," rather than a curse. This interpretation changes the tone of her message, showing not rebellion, but perhaps an acceptance of mortality amid suffering. Yet her words also serve as a challenge. They force us to ask ourselves how we react to despair. Do we give in to bitterness, or do we find strength to hold on? Job's wife teaches us that even in moments of perceived weakness, there is an opportunity to grow in compassion and understanding. Her story is a powerful reminder that faith doesn't always come in perfect, unshakable forms. Sometimes faith is messy, filled with questions and cries for answers. And yet, even in the raw honesty of her words, there's a lesson about being true to our emotions before God. If her words resonate with you, consider this. How do we respond when life feels unbearable? And can we find ways to turn our moments of doubt into stepping stones toward deeper faith? If this message has touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Comment the word resilience to show your connection to this journey. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more reflections on faith and grace. To truly understand Job's wife, we must step back into the culture of her time, a world vastly different from our own. In the ancient Near East, women's lives were often shaped by the expectations of their roles as wives and mothers. Their identity and social standing were deeply tied to family and household stability. For Job's wife, the loss of her children would have been not only a personal tragedy, but also a societal one. In her culture, children were a source of legacy, economic security, and honor. Losing them all at once would have been a blow to her very sense of purpose and identity. Her husband's suffering added another layer of complexity. In a society where a wife's role was to support and uphold her family, seeing Job covered in sores and sitting in ashes would have been heartbreaking. She was expected to remain strong, yet the cultural pressures she faced likely added to her despair. It's also important to consider the spiritual beliefs of her time. While Job's unwavering faith is celebrated, the idea of divine punishment for sin was a widely held belief. Job's wife may have struggled to reconcile their suffering with her understanding of God. Her words could reflect the weight of trying to make sense of a world that no longer seemed just. When we view her actions through this cultural lens, her response becomes less about weakness and more about the overwhelming burden she carried. Her reaction reminds us that faith doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is shaped by our circumstances, upbringing, and societal pressures. Job's wife challenges us to think about how culture influences our own faith journeys. What unspoken expectations or beliefs do we carry that shape how we respond to life's trials? Her story invites us to explore how our context can either strengthen or shake our trust in God. As we move forward, let's reflect on this. How can understanding someone's background help us show greater compassion in times of struggle? Job's wife may have lived in a different era, but her challenges feel all too familiar to anyone facing societal or personal pressures today. Faith is often most tested in the fire of life's greatest challenges. Job's wife, though often criticized, offers a profound lesson about the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming pain. Her story reminds us that even when faith falters, it can still be a part of the journey toward healing and understanding. The trials Job and his wife endured were unimaginable. Losing children, wealth, and stability in quick succession would test even the strongest believer. In this context, Job's wife embodies a raw and honest response to suffering, a reaction many of us can relate to in moments of despair. Her story reveals that resilience is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to keep going despite it. While Job's faith stood firm, his wife's response shows a different kind of strength, the courage to express pain and doubt openly. This honesty is a powerful reminder that God's love does not waver in the face of our human weakness. It's easy to judge her harshly, but consider this. How often do we too wrestle with our faith during life's darkest moments? Resilience isn't always about standing tall. Sometimes it's about surviving the storm and finding our footing again afterward. Job's wife also teaches us the importance of grace, both toward ourselves and others. In our struggles, it's natural to falter, to question, and to doubt. But these moments don't define us. They refine us. Her journey, though not as detailed as Job's, reminds us that even when faith wavers, it can ultimately grow stronger through hardship. Faith under fire can look different for everyone. For Job's wife, it might have been quieter, hidden beneath the surface of her grief. But her presence in the story, however brief, shows that resilience isn't about perfection, it's about perseverance. As you reflect on her story, ask yourself, how do you find strength in the midst of trials? And how can we extend grace to ourselves and others when faith feels fragile? Job's wife shows us that resilience is not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to keep seeking even in the darkest times. Suffering leaves scars that are not always visible. For Job's wife, the emotional toll of her losses must have been immense, even if her struggles are largely unspoken in the biblical text. Her silence, apart from her one quoted outburst, speaks volumes about the depth of her pain and the complexity of her experience. Imagine enduring the loss of your children, the collapse of financial stability, and the helplessness of watching your spouse suffer physically and emotionally. Job's wife carried these burdens without a support system in a culture where expressing grief, especially as a woman, might have been seen as a sign of weakness. Her story reminds us that suffering often isolates. How many of us have felt alone in our pain, unable to articulate the weight of our struggles? Job's wife reflects this silence, embodying the countless people who carry their grief inwardly, unsure of how to process or share it. Yet her response also highlights the human need for release. Her famous words may have been an emotional breaking point, a cry of frustration that echoes the feelings many of us have when life feels unbearably heavy. In that moment, she gave voice to what so many feel but are afraid to say. The emotional toll of suffering doesn't only affect the person experiencing it directly. Job's wife shows us how grief radiates outward, affecting relationships and perspectives. While Job leaned into his faith, his wife's struggle reveals the other side of coping, one marked by questions, anger, and confusion. This silent struggle also calls us to greater empathy. How often do we overlook the pain of those standing beside someone who is suffering? Job's wife challenges us to consider the unseen battles people face, encouraging us to approach others with kindness and understanding. As we reflect on her story, let's ask ourselves, how do we support those enduring silent struggles? And how can we create spaces where grief and pain can be expressed without fear of judgment? In her silence, Job's wife speaks volumes about the need for compassion and the healing power of being truly seen and understood. Judgment is often the first response when we encounter someone's flaws or struggles. Job's wife has been judged harshly throughout history for her words and actions, yet her story offers profound lessons about the power of empathy. By looking beyond her mistakes, we uncover a narrative rich in humanity and grace. Her words, "Curse God and die," have been interpreted as a sign of faithlessness. But what if, instead of condemnation, we offered understanding? Grief and pain can drive even the most faithful hearts to moments of despair. Job's wife teaches us that one moment of weakness does not define a person's character or faith journey. We often see suffering as a test of character, expecting people to endure pain gracefully. But Job's wife challenges this expectation. Her raw reaction reminds us that there is no right way to grieve. Empathy invites us to accept others in their messiness, offering support instead of judgment. Her story also sheds light on how we view others' pain. It's easy to label Job as the hero of resilience and his wife as the failure, but this dichotomy oversimplifies their shared experience. Both suffered unimaginable losses, yet their responses were different. Empathy helps us honor each person's unique way of coping with hardship. In today's world, how often do we judge without understanding? Job's wife invites us to pause and consider the stories behind people's actions. What burdens are they carrying? How might their pain influence their words or choices? Compassion starts with asking these questions. Her story also encourages us to extend empathy to ourselves. Like Job's wife, we all have moments we regret, times when pain speaks louder than faith. Recognizing our own humanity helps us approach others with greater kindness. As we reflect on her journey, let's ask ourselves, how can we replace judgment with understanding? Job's wife challenges us to see others not for their lowest moments, but for their shared humanity. In doing so, we learn that empathy is not just a gift to others, it's a path to healing for ourselves as well. Job's wife lived in a vastly different time, yet her struggles feel strikingly familiar to many of us today. Her story is a timeless reflection of the challenges we face in navigating pain, doubt, and faith. By exploring modern parallels, we uncover the ways her journey resonates with our own lives. In today's world, loss comes in many forms: losing a loved one, facing financial hardship, or experiencing a health crisis. Just as Job's wife watched her world crumble, many of us have felt the weight of life's trials. Her reaction, though often criticized, mirrors the honest emotions we all feel when life takes an unexpected and painful turn. Her story also speaks to the loneliness of grief. In the midst of suffering, it's easy to feel isolated, as if no one truly understands the depth of our pain. Job's wife, overshadowed by Job's prominence in the narrative, reminds us of the silent struggles that often go unnoticed. How many people around us are carrying burdens we cannot see? The societal pressures she faced also find echoes in our modern lives. Expectations to remain strong, keep faith, and endure silently can weigh heavily on those in pain. Job's wife challenges these norms, showing that expressing doubt and vulnerability is not a failure, but a natural response to hardship. Her journey invites us to reflect on how we support others in their suffering. Do we, like Job's friends, offer platitudes or judgment, or do we extend empathy and understanding? Her story encourages us to build a community of compassion where people feel safe to express their struggles without fear of condemnation. Another powerful parallel is the transformative power of grace. In our own lives, moments of doubt and despair can lead to growth and renewal. Job's wife shows us that even when faith wavers, it can emerge stronger through the trials we face. As you reflect on her story, consider this. What parallels do you see between her journey and your own challenges? And how can her example inspire you to approach life's hardships with honesty and grace? Her story reminds us that even in our weakest moments, we are not alone, and there is hope for renewal. Survival is often the greatest testimony to the strength of the human spirit. Job's wife, though mentioned only briefly, embodies this resilience. Her story doesn't end with her despair. It hints at survival, hope, and the possibility of restoration after the storm. The Bible tells us that Job's life was restored, with blessings that surpassed what he had before. Although the text focuses primarily on Job, we can infer that his wife also experienced this restoration. Together, they rebuilt their lives, welcoming new children and finding a renewed sense of purpose. Imagine what it must have been like for Job's wife to hold her new children after losing so many. While grief likely remained a part of her, the act of starting again reveals a strength that often goes unnoticed. She didn't just survive the storm, she emerged with the courage to embrace life anew. Her story reminds us that survival is not about erasing the pain of the past. Instead, it's about finding hope in the aftermath. For Job's wife, hope likely came in small, quiet moments, the laughter of a child, the warmth of family, or the renewal of faith over time. In our own lives, we too face storms that threaten to break us. Job's wife shows us that even in the darkest moments, survival is possible. Her testimony speaks to the quiet victories of enduring hardship and finding joy again, no matter how small. Her journey also calls us to reflect on the role of faith in restoration. While her faith may have faltered during her trials, the restoration she experienced shows that God's grace is not dependent on our perfection. It is freely given, offering healing and renewal even when we stumble. As we consider her story, let's ask ourselves, what does survival look like in our own lives, and how can we find hope after the storms we face? Job's wife reminds us that survival is more than enduring. It's about embracing the possibilities that come after the storm has passed. Job's wife is often remembered for her moment of despair, but her story is so much more than that. When we revisit her journey, we see a legacy of strength, resilience, and faith that often goes unnoticed. She stands as a reminder that even in our weakest moments, there is room for grace and redemption. Her role in Job's life may have been overshadowed, but her presence was vital. She shared in his trials, bore the weight of unimaginable loss, and stood by him as they rebuilt their lives. Her story reminds us that strength doesn't always look like unwavering faith. It can also look like surviving, struggling, and continuing despite the odds. In many ways, Job's wife represents all of us. She is a portrait of humanity in its rawest form, grappling with grief, doubt, and the desire for answers. Her legacy lies in her ability to reflect the emotions we all feel but are sometimes afraid to express. Her story also speaks to the transformative power of God's grace. Though her faith faltered, she was not abandoned. The restoration she experienced alongside Job is a testament to God's ability to redeem even our darkest moments and offer new beginnings. In revisiting her journey, we are reminded of the importance of compassion. How often do we judge others without understanding their struggles? Job's wife challenges us to approach others with empathy, recognizing that their journeys may be more complex than they seem. Her legacy is also one of perseverance. She didn't allow the storms of life to define her. Instead, she became a part of a larger story of restoration and renewal. Her quiet strength speaks volumes about the power of faith, even when it falters. As we conclude her story, let's reflect on this. What legacy are we building through our own struggles? Job's wife shows us that strength is not about perfection. It's about faith, resilience, and the courage to keep going. Her story invites us to embrace our own imperfections and trust in God's grace to guide us through. Job's wife is more than a fleeting figure in the Bible. She's a testament to the raw, unfiltered experience of humanity. Her journey, marked by grief, doubt, and restoration, speaks to the struggles we all face and the grace we all need. Through her story, we've learned the importance of empathy, the strength found in survival, and the hope that comes with restoration. Her legacy reminds us that even when our faith falters, God's grace remains steadfast, offering healing and renewal when we need it most. As you reflect on her life, may you find inspiration in her resilience and comfort in the reminder that your struggles too can become a story of strength and faith. Let us close with a prayer. Lord, thank you for the lessons found in the lives of those who came before us. Help us to see beyond judgment, extending empathy and understanding to those who are hurting. May we find strength in our weakest moments and trust in your grace to guide us through every trial. Amen. If this message has touched your heart, share it with a friend who may need encouragement today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more reflections on faith and join us as we uncover the powerful messages hidden in the Bible's most intriguing stories.